Welcome to Healing Beyond the Trauma. My name is Megan Alves. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And this podcast, I want to break the stigma around mental health and have real, unfiltered conversations about healing. Some stories are going to be raw, even triggering at times, but they're real and they're honest because healing starts with honesty. If you've ever felt overwhelmed, stuck, or like you're carrying it all, you're not. Here, you're going to gain validation, practical tools, and a new perspective to move forward. Because healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about reclaiming your future. So let's dive in. Hey, and welcome back to another episode. I know I always say this, but I'm going to just say it again. I'm super excited. And today I'm even more so excited to introduce my guest to you. I know her as Melissa, but let me introduce Dr. Melissa because this woman is one of the biggest powerhouses I have met since trying in this world of craziness of entrepreneurship. And we have met and known each other for over a year and a half now, almost going on 2 years, as we were growing our baby businesses and learning all the ins and outs. But I got the special privilege of reviewing her up and coming. It's now in its, what is it called, Melissa? The Dr. Melissa, it's in the pre-sale. Thank you. Of your book. And so today we're going to really hop in on the topic of empathy because you are a badass leader in empathy and it does not come with quite the story. So welcome today, Dr. Melissa. If you could take a few minutes and introduce yourself.
Sure. And first, just thank you so much for having me here. I mean, you and I, we met, we just clicked. I mean, you talk about empathy as far as understanding and connection. It was just like, boom, it was there,
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful to have you in my life.
So I'm so grateful to have you in my life. And some people talk about soulmates, right? Like you find your soulmates. Like nobody talks enough about what two women, what it feels like when we get into our older years of life and you just connect. And I mean, I'm in my season of childhood and Dr. Melissa came over and she's like, I don't know how you're doing this, but let me support you through this because even though we're in different seasons, it was like this beautiful connection. And so I just want to say before we go into your story, how important it is for you guys to get into the rooms and get uncomfortable because some amazing relationships can happen from them. And I didn't even realize that. And hey, we should probably say thank you to Ati because she put us in some rooms, right? So we'll do thank you there.
No, I mean that's how the universe works, right? I mean, you end up with someone who helps you connect and then you go from there, but without that seed, nothing grows.
So, Dr. Melissa, tell us about this book that is coming out. Give us a little overview, and then I would love for you to dive into why you decided to join down this, take the leap of faith, because this was not out of missing any step of vulnerability for you. I know that this was not an easy journey and it is not going to be an easy journey. So please bring our guests in today of your book, your expert topic, and why you went down this path.
Yeah. So, without going into all the gory details, because there's just a lot,
Get the book, right?
Well, I mean, I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah.
This would be a 5-hour show. That's all.
Yes.
And your listeners would probably check out and want to go get dinner and go to sleep or something.
I don't know. I couldn't put the book down, but
well, that means the world to me actually, because that's what I want.
Yeah.
So I was actually a performing musician for most of my life, and it was all I wanted to do. I started playing when I was 6. I was playing in orchestras. I actually loved it enough that I went to college for it, and then did a master's in it, and then did a doctorate in it. French horn performance.
Oh my
So
gosh.
my first master's is from Yale. I was that serious about it.
Yeah.
And
And so talented.
There was definitely talent there, but there's also a lot of grit and hard work. There's a lot of rejection. There's a lot of anybody in the arts. It's just part of what it is. You kind of it's a brutal place to be, and you better love it because there's not much money in it, you know.
That's true
But on
too.
the other hand, I mean, I played with Ray Charles. I've played with Mannheim Steamroller. I've played with the director Gus Van Sant and the Van Trapp kids and Manhattan Transfer and like all these really super cool Pink Martini,
Oh my
all these
gosh.
really really cool groups and people and things, and I wouldn't change it at all. But it is a meat grinder of a field. It just
Yeah.
is, you know. And
What
there's a lot of people that want a spot.
Right. What surprised you when you started showing up and you were able to get into some of those rooms? I know we're going off topic here, but I love like when you talk about your music days, it just sounds like, yes, hard work, yes, some big struggles. But what do you feel like, really surprised you or something that stood out during that season of your life?
I was shocked that there are people out there that are actually in music, even at the highest levels, because it's what they do well, and not necessarily because they have any passion for it. And I'm like, it's music, it's all feeling, it's all passion. And they're like, and in all honesty, that's probably why they're the ones that do better, because they've got no pressure.
Mm.
They don't have that, oh, but I want this so bad. But it really shocked me to find out that there are some people that have zero feeling at all and yet are at the top of their game. I mean, some of them are really big names. It's just a job. And that blew
Wow.
my mind. Yeah.
Yeah. How did that get presented to you? That you realized that they don't have this like just this drive and this huge, obviously they love it and they maybe started out with that, but what really showed up that you were like, wait a minute.
So I was playing in this symphony, and it was a top tier symphony. So I mean, it was one you get paid pretty well to do, but also the pressure's high. And I'm sitting there and I'm talking to. I was subbing. I came in. Someone gets sick. You got to be able to go in and just lay down. It's a very specific set of skills. And I'm talking to the person who's the stable third horn player. So French horn section, there's usually four of them. So needless to say, there aren't a lot of jobs for us out there. And I'm talking to her, and she's like, "Oh, I got to go to New York this weekend because I'm subbing at the Met, and then, oh, and then I'm taking this audition, and I finaled in it, but I don't really." And I just looked at her and I go, "I'm subbing. Do you realize you're living the dream?" And she actually was like, "Oh, well, yeah, yeah, I guess." And I'm like, "No, you have what everybody else wants. Enjoy the ride."
Yeah.
And
How
she was
easy we can like forget, right? Like she was in the grind and
Mhm.
probably I would venture to say, I mean, you and I talk about burnout and exhaustion. I would venture to say somewhere in there and just missing that feeling that you just brought up. Wait a minute, like you are living the dream that I only hope to have. Like I'm subbing, like I want to be doing that.
Yeah,
And it sounds like it just like reframed that for her a little bit. I mean, who knows how that impact went, but
yeah.
yeah.
Well, she was one that her parents were both musicians, and I think her mom, no, her dad was a horn player. So like she just grew up around it, so she just didn't even think about it. And then as she got older and she showed promise, and they, paid for her to go to the best schools, and she did all this stuff. So she really never had a passion for it. It was just like, yeah, I'm really good at it, and I have the right context because of my parents, and yeah, I guess I'll do that because I can't think of anything else I want to do better.
Mm,
So, not only was she in the grind, but she really didn't have a passion for it. And it was just kind of like, you know, I may never have the step ups that you had because my dad was military and my mom was a teacher, and whatever I learned about music, I learned on my own. And it's just, sometimes it happens. My parents always wondered where the spaceship was when the mothership was going to come pick me up, you know, because it's just nobody knew
you weren't fitting
where.
quite into their mold.
No, I did not. I still do not fit the mold, and that's fine.
Yes.
But on the other hand, I would have like given my eye teeth to be like, yes, I'm third horn in this top tier symphony, and we're going and touring Taiwan, and last week we played with the Moody Blues, and this kind of thing, and yeah, she's just kind of like, oh man, I don't want it. And it's just like,
Yeah,
life's not
wild.
fair.
Yeah. And so, I mean, talking about that because you had this drive to go into music and
Mhm.
really what tell us what ended up steering that in a different direction for you, because then you started teaching, right? And you really thought that that was where you wanted to be. And that's really where a lot of this, you know, overcoming of struggle really comes from. So bring us into how you went from wanting to go down that path and then it just like took that turn.
Yeah. So the thing with being a gigging musician is even when you're doing super cool things with super cool people, I also really like food, shelter, and clothing. And being a gigging musician, you're always tied to the next gig. So I went and got my doctorate and said, yeah, I want to teach, which I love teaching anyway. I had students, and being a professor, it's kind of like the top tier on the academic side. So I was like, okay, I'll do this. So I went through all the work. I got the job, which for a French hornist is a big deal because like that year there was maybe 11 jobs open in North America.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about universities and community colleges and all of that, and think about how many of them have a full-time tenure track French horn professor, and the ones that are there aren't leaving.
Right.
It's kind of like watching the obituaries. I mean, not to be dark about it, but it really is.
Right. Why would they leave? Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did get a job and I was really excited about it. And I moved, all the way across the country to go do my thing. And within my very first term at this place, I was assaulted by one of my colleagues. And the thing is what happened was really brutal and unnecessary. But what happened after trying to get someone to listen to me was the hard part, and understanding that this system was so broken that something was wrong. I mean, it took me 7 years to finally spin out to the end. And I mean, in academia, you have to get tenure. You do everything to get tenure. And for me, that's research, that's performance, that's writing, that's lessons, that's recruiting, that's, all of this stuff. And by the end of 7 years, I mean, the chair, which would have been my boss, the chair of that department, when I went and talked to him and told him what had happened, he basically told me that if I was already stirring up trouble in my first term, I was never ever going to get tenure, which I didn't care. I just wanted to feel safe in my office. My office and this guy's office were right next to each other. And they refused to even move me. So I was just under like low grade trauma all the time because,
I know, as you mentioned, low grade trauma, I know that that took you a while to realize that that's what was happening, right? And so, do you mind bring us into what safety you felt and how quickly that safety shifted for you in that space?
yeah. I felt very safe. I mean, I was a performing musician. I was all over big cities. I lived in I mean, orchestras, you have to go where the work is. And that probably means big cities.
And tons of
And
traveling for you, right? Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and you stay alert and you learn all the stuff, you stay where it's lit, you have your keys in your hand, because the thing to remember too, a French horn, I would carry it on my back in a case. So I was always off balance just a little bit. I mean, it's just you're hauling this big heavy instrument around. So, I felt very safe because it was still a city, but it wasn't like a New York or an LA. And I was like, no, it's fine. And then within this building, I'm like, this is my office. I'm in my department. I'm safe. These are other musicians. This place should be fine, especially since I'm there in broad daylight. There's people up and down the halls. There's rehearsals. There's practicing. There's stuff happening all the time.
Yeah.
And this assault happened right in the middle of the day. It was completely unexpected. I walked in. I had my heels on like I always do. I mean, I'm 5'3". I tend to wear heels, plus like a big French horn on my back. And I was shoved into my office and pushed off balance so quick I didn't even see it coming because I wasn't paying attention. I unlocked my office and was ready to walk in, and I wasn't paying attention to what was going on around me.
Yeah. And
You
so, of
know?
course, that moment of that vulnerability come up was something that you kind of talk about for a moment. I wasn't paying attention, or I let my guard down for that moment, right? Like some of those narratives can get created so quickly, where in reality, you just brought us into I had all the check boxes. I thought that this was my office. It was a safe hallway. It was midday. It was around other professors and, professionals. And so
Yeah.
as you vulnerably talk about this in your book, but as we talk about this in this, moment after this assault happened, and I know from reading the book that it took you a moment to get yourself together after this person came in. I believe it was a lot of yelling. It was, you really didn't have anywhere to go. You were, in my image, very cornered
Yeah.
during that time. I almost call it like a whirlwind for you, right? Because you describe it very clear in your book where I was able to bring myself in there, which isn't easy for a writer to do for a reader, but these are those moments that are so important. It's not that easy for us to realize a circumstance can come up this way, but how you get out of it is really the beautiful part. So before we go into that journey, let's go back into what felt like forever.
Yeah.
When you were able to collect yourself, what do you remember about the steps that you took in that moment to help yourself get collected and be able to kind of take that next step after the assault?
I would like to say that I had a logical sequence, but I didn't. I think there was a lot of fight or flight going on.
Yeah.
And once the door slammed, and I still remember it very, very clearly. The office was tiny to begin with, and he actually had me shoved up against the wall, kind of by a desk. So there was nowhere for me to go. And I had the instrument on my back, so I was shoved backwards. And I couldn't have righted myself if I wanted to. So after he left and slammed the door, I actually just stood there and listened because I didn't realize his office is right next to mine. So am I going to hear his door slam? Am I going to hear him, all of a sudden start banging the wall? Am I going to hear him go down? What am I going to hear? So I just listened and just stopped. Not because I wanted to, but because I think I was just scared.
Yeah.
I was just stunned,
And this
like
wasn't
it's unheard.
something that you've ever experienced before.
Not like that.
Right.
Not in a situation where I was so vulnerable. I've
Yeah.
had people yell at me. I mean, music is a rough field. I've had conductors scream at me. I've had people bang on a desk at me. I've had stuff happen, but I've never had it being in such a personal position. And I've never had anyone get that right up into me. I mean, he was pressed up against me. He was
Yeah.
because I can remember that even after he left, I could smell him in the room, and it just
Yeah.
he had spit on my face and in my hair, and it just, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know.
And it lingered for a while. And
Yeah.
and somehow after this, let me just listen. And then, of course, as many of us do, who can I turn to for help? This wasn't okay. And you were met
Yeah.
for 7 years of walls and
Yeah.
barriers and whatever we want to call it in whatever professional field. Many people have experienced trying to get help in a situation that isn't okay in a professional setting. And so, as you hit those barriers, how did you take that turning point to realize that empathy was the key missing in so many of these barriers that you kept going up against?
It took a long time. So when I finally, it just finally became clear that this was done. And for me to leave could very well tank my career, which I think by the time I left 2016, so I was like 45, 43, something like that. I mean, it really was what I had done my whole life, you know?
Right.
But after I left, I just spun for 7 more years because I didn't know what else to do. It was the only thing I'd ever wanted to do. It wasn't just that I played music. I mean, I like was the music. And as dramatic as it sounds, it was. That's how it was. When I just I didn't just play it. It's what I was. So to just walk away from it was one of the hardest things that I ever had to do. So afterwards, there was, and still is sometimes, kind of a grieving process.
I love that you named it that. I remember it. And for those of you listening, like we said, Melissa and I, like, we talked and quickly got on a level that I wanted to know her story. She wanted to know my story. And that's
Yeah.
that connection that sometimes we often miss in building relationships. And when you mentioned your resiliency through this, although at that time, definitely it felt like some of the weakest points, and the grief is, I mean, grief in itself, it doesn't have to be that you just lose someone and they're no longer here on earth, or however you guys want to see it, right?
Yeah.
Grief can come in forms of loss of your career. For those of you just listening, if you don't have the opportunity to see this, I mean, Melissa's entire body was like, I was music. I mean, like you embodied it. And so when you think about that level of grief, it does get complicated because this wasn't the future that you could see or grasp onto, which grief very much brings that up, right? Like, what's the next step? How do I? And that can sometimes take a very long time to get through. But then if we don't normalize that grief can be outside of just losing somebody, and I'm putting that in air quotes because grief can be within the loss of our career, within the loss of our future, of what we had envisioned it to be. And I'll even say, even as a clinical therapist, as therapists, we had some periods of time that we did not do grief justice, right? We can go through all the, um, stages of grief as they were written out. It was linear. And it was like
Yes.
stage one to stage two to stage three. And then clinical therapists and psychologists came back and they were like, wait a minute. Nope, this is not accurate. So we did a little damage, right? But then we learned from that and we said, grief can ebb and flow and we can go back to certain stages of grief. And then recently I heard of Brene Brown, which I know you're a huge fan. We both talk about Brene all the time.
Yeah.
One of the gentlemen that helped Kubler-Ross develop these stages of grief, he unfortunately lost his child as he was working on the revamping of grief. And of course, everybody was saying, well, how is the grief researcher doing through grief? And David's like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm grieving. I'm not a grief researcher. Like, I'm grieving the loss of my child. And he remembers at one point, very long through his journey of grieving, that he got to that level of acceptance. And he was like, wait a minute, this isn't just it. And he decided to add another stage, and that was meaning and purpose, right? And I'm not doing this podcast or his book justice by any means. I'll make sure to link them, but I really want to highlight how important it is that we normalize grief and we break some of the stigmas around grief, because here you were, you know, mid 40s, and you're like, wait a minute, I have to like uproot everything that I've put my entire life into. And how brave of you at that time, but it was that survival of where do I go and take the next step? Because this isn't it. I'm not going to continue to be treated like this. So you made that active choice
Yeah,
eventually.
I did. I'm the one who left because I mean, I did have a choice. I could have hired a lawyer. I could have fought it. I could have, I, you know, the, I don't like to use the word regret. It's not really a regret, but if I go back and I think about it, the one thing I wish I had done is called the police. I wish I had a report, but I was so worried about them taking away my career, which, spoiler alert, they did it anyway. They just did it slowly instead of quickly, you know. But even without that, I could have hired a lawyer. I could have, I mean, although, like I mentioned in the book, they threw away all my tenure stuff. So everything I had done was just gone. So I didn't even know where to begin with that. But even if I did hire a lawyer, what was I going to win?
Yeah.
I mean, the right to continue to work with these people who didn't want me there and who were willing to treat other people like this. I mean, is that really a prize worth having? So it's just kind of like, the only thing I could even begin to try and get back is some self-respect, which I'd lost as well. So it was like, I can't do this. I can't, they've already destroyed so much of what's me. I need to try and hang on to whatever's left.
Right. And so, as we just talked about those stages of grief, and it's something that really reminds me, where and when did you decide that you were going to take this pain, take this survival of all of that, and place your energy into something beautiful and guide others in empathic leadership?
I don't know that there was a point. I just knew I had to do something. I knew that because I was spinning, and for me, and I'll be honest about this, if I'm spinning and I'm having trouble and I'm not being able to display self-empathy because of what's happening and the self-judgment and what did I do and what did I do wrong? For me, that ends up being alcohol and food. It does. I mean, you can tell my state of mind easily by those two things. So I just knew that if I continued on the path I was on, I was going to kill myself. I was going to kill myself either slowly or quickly, and it was time to do something.
Which, science wise, it's, of course, you were searching for something to bring some type of quick relief or, like dopamine, serotonin, like forget about those when you're in fight or flight. Just want some type of fulfillment or satisfaction, whatever it may be. And, you and I have talked about, and I've mentioned in other podcasts when those are going through a healing journey and alcohol or food and food's so freaking hard, right? Like if you think about
Yeah.
recovering from food as an addiction for your healing journey, like what am I going to tell somebody in the clinical setting? Like, hey, avoid the grocery store for a little bit. Yeah, that's not going to
Yeah,
happen.
exactly.
And I
You know,
bring light to this. I'm not bringing like this is a funny thing by any means, but gosh, this is
no.
such a tough journey when you finally name alcohol and food are my coping mechanisms and the way
Yeah.
rate that I'm going, I'm going to kill myself fast or slow. So what am I going to do? And so with that being said, what is empathy and why did you go down that journey and choose to be an expert in this field?
Because after really thinking about this long and hard, and I mean for years, and watching other situations, my husband and I did some consulting in healthcare for a while. I basically just hid, is what I did. But because I could be behind the scenes doing the data analytics and the HR stuff and the, not necessarily driving the bus, just making sure the bus ran, I was able to actually watch what was going on and happening again and again and again in these facilities that were just making hash out of their people and in the process out of their profits, out of their productivity, out of their innovation. And I kept seeing this pattern and I'm like, what is it? Obviously this is a human behavior pattern, but I don't know what it is. So then I started doing a little bit of research on my own, which led me into the doctorate because I mean, anybody to do two doctorates, they're going to have a really good reason. It's not something you do for fun. So, or you shouldn't. If you do, we need to talk because there's some human behavior there I don't understand. But I was like, I need to get a hold of this because I need to make peace with what happened. And I think there's something here. And I really think there's something missing in so many of these organizations I've seen. And I didn't know what it was at first. All I knew is that, it's like everybody knows, right? Empathy is about I feel what you feel. And I knew that when I was in that situation, nobody seemed to feel anything that I was feeling. And I don't know if it's because they couldn't or they didn't want to or the system had beat it out of them or what. But these weren't bad people. These were good people and they wanted to do well and they had jobs. And, some of them even gave me a little bit of sympathy, but they didn't feel what I was feeling. And that's where I began. And now I understand empathy is not necessarily about feeling and that's where the disconnect happens. It's about connection and understanding. And feeling is one way to do that, but it's not the only way. So all of these people are like, well, we don't bring feelings into organizations. Well, first of all, wrong. That's a myth. That goes back to command and control style leadership, which we have proven again and again doesn't work. But number two, empathy isn't just about feelings, it's about understanding and connection. So there's a logical, data-driven, results-oriented business case to actually bring this into organizations. And the way I look at it, as crazy as the whole thing sounds, because it does. I mean, I spend a lot of my time educating because empathy is just this foo-foo thing and people don't really know what it is. But if I can keep one person, just one, from having to feel as alone and abandoned and messed up as I was, then I've done my job and it is all worth it, even another doctorate.
I'll hold your hand through it, Dr. Melissa.
Oh my
I will
God,
cheer
yeah.
you on. But I mean, that would be wild. But with that being said, you say something so important when it comes to empathy, where we kind of have this stigma that it's about feelings and it's a little woo-y. But
Yeah.
you mentioned it's about understanding and connecting. But I even know, both you and I, by the way, for those listening, we've worked and behind the scenes, in front of the scenes in psychiatric hospitals, and we know that is a challenging setting, but it's such a
Yeah.
beautiful setting to help those going through one of the most difficult times of their lives, right? Oftentimes I would hear, even on the clinical setting, so even my fully licensed clinicians, from the baby clinicians to leadership, is that how would I connect with somebody if I really can't feel what they've felt, and if I don't really understand what they've actually gone through because I haven't walked in their shoes? What would you say to somebody that is struggling in that area?
So I actually hear two parts of that because in the medical profession, as you know, a lot of people are trained not to use empathy because you end up with empathy burnout. And that's a real thing. I mean, if we burn out all of our people that are trying to help, then what? So first of all, when we're dealing with empathy, you're understanding and connecting with another person, but not necessarily being in the same situation they were in. So when we talk about loss, maybe whoever they're with, that person has lost their child, right? I may not have lost a child, but I understand loss because I've lost a parent. I've lost my entire career. I've lost pets. It's different, it's on a spectrum. I'm not going to compare one to the other, but I do understand loss. So I can connect to them on that, even though I haven't had that exact situation. The other thing is now we're talking about a different kind of empathy as well, because there's emotional or affective empathy, but there's cognitive empathy, which means I logically understand what you're going through. I just don't necessarily feel it. And sometimes that's actually very helpful because it can help us keep a cool head and a warm heart, which in those situations is what we need.
And so, if, as we're hearing, and some of these, bigger words for those of us that are new to empathy, we have the cognitive and the emotional empathy. Can you highlight again what are the differences? And if I want empathy, but I'm not sure how to give that to others or myself, how would you explain the difference between those layers of empathy? And then what are some logical steps to help the listeners become more aware in that space?
Yeah, those are fantastic questions. So empathy as a thing. I mean, you have to understand that there's this big ball we call empathy. There's actually 43 different kinds that fall into 8 broad categories. It's huge. And it spans neuroscience and biology and philosophy and psychology. And there's like all of this stuff. So even as I say these 2 categories, it isn't quite that neat.
That's cute,
We're
Megan,
dealing
but
with
not that
human
pretty.
behavior.
Yes.
Yeah, we're dealing with, you know what I'm saying. We're dealing with human behavior. Nothing is ever that neat. But when you're talking about empathy in particular, the one we're aware of is the I feel what you feel. And that's an important one to be able to react emotionally. And usually a lot of it has to do with, micro expressions, macro expressions, watching what people are doing, understanding that feeling because you have been there. And usually it's a very quick thing. We are biologically hardwired, most of us. There's a few that aren't. There are a few who aren't, but most of us are hardwired biologically to be able to understand this. I mean, newborns will show what's called emotional contagion, whereas if one cries, others will cry. It's just like a regular contagion, right? It spreads
Right.
like a virus, and so there is a biological basis to that.
Yeah.
That's more where your affective or emotional empathy is going to come in. Yeah, I feel it because
Yeah.
This is what we're wired to do. Cognitive empathy is something that can actually be learned and
Mm.
practiced. Now, affective empathy, you can practice it like a skill to a certain degree and get better at it. If you already have it, it's a lot easier to build on that. And most of us do. But cognitive empathy, it's learning to understand, if someone gives me these cues, well, my cat just died, that these are the proper responses, that this is what I understand, that, they just lost their grandmother and they're asking for these days off. So the proper response is to say, yes, please go to that funeral, even though I may not be feeling that loss as a leader, but still to be able to say, these are the correct things to do. I'm cognitively laying it out. I know what needs to happen, you know?
And so if at times we can be empathy blind in a sense, like we know that we care for people, but we might have a little bit of that awareness. We just can't quite see what we're doing, but we might hear snippets from those if you're in leadership or if you're in an environment that you work with a team or anything like that. Maybe if you're hearing snippets that maybe you're not connecting on certain levels, what is a good starting place for somebody that's trying to learn and understand empathy, especially now that we threw out there, like, hey, you guys, here's empathy and but there's 48 different categories of it, right? So if we're
Yeah.
trying to narrow this in and become more aware and kind of take those glasses off, because what we don't know, we can't change, what are
Right.
some practical steps of starting to gain some better awareness?
So the best thing to do is always to start at home, in my opinion, right? So the way I teach my clients is you start with self-reflection because a lot of these people that I work with don't have a lot of empathy for themselves. So of course they're not going to have a lot of empathy for other people. It's part of it. So you start with self-reflection, looking at what you're doing, looking at these different situations, understanding, you know, this person triggers me every time. Or, yeah, I probably could have handled that meeting better rather than yelling at people. Or this person's been trying to talk to me for 2 weeks now. Maybe I need to make that time. But actually reflecting. And as you do that, being critical, not caring, which means I'm not going to pull in a bunch of self-judgment and, oh, I'm a terrible leader and the imposter syndrome and all the other stuff that gets tied up in that keeps people from self-reflecting. Once you reflect and you understand what's going on inside of you, you can start to become self-aware, which is where you start understanding how you fit into the world. I am aware of my place in this universe and how this affects other people. Because now that you've done that, you can start to have self-empathy, which if empathy is understanding and connecting, you're able to actually understand and connect with yourself because you've done the work, you've reflected on it, you're aware of how it works. Now you can start having self-empathy. And once you have that self-empathy, now you can start applying it to other people and having empathy.
I hear this word self-empathy. What does it actually mean to have self-empathy?
Self-empathy is a tricky one. And here's why. Because there isn't much about it in the academic literature, if it's mentioned at all. So it's not necessarily a recognized thing. But I think there's something to it. And this is where a lot of my research is actually going. So think of it this way. If empathy is about understanding and connection, then self-empathy is going to be about understanding and connecting to yourself. For instance, a lot of these leaders that I work with are very self-motivated. They're highly driven. They're highly self-actualized. They're just like, go, 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 go. But because of that, they lock down their emotions. They're going to be the ones working late when a family member is sick. They're going to be the ones burning out because they don't show themselves the compassion that they need to be able to get through the day. So they're not showing themselves the self-empathy that they need to be able to lead well because they haven't reflected on what they're doing. Well, gee, if I'm in the office 120 hours every week and my wife is telling me I need to be home because our son is having problems, then I either need to be there or this needs to be addressed somehow. But either way, I need to reflect on my actions. Then I need to be self-aware and understand what my actions are doing within the greater realm of the world. And then I can start to say, okay, you made these decisions, the self-empathy, right? Connect and understand. Yes, I made these decisions because I'm highly driven. Yes, I made these decisions because I thought I was doing the right things. Yes, I made these decisions because I understand I'm a fantastic technician, but I might not be the best leader, and I feel insecure about that.
That's
You
hard
could
to say
start,
sometimes, right? Like
yeah,
actually noticing where our insecurities are, actually noticing where we might have let our values go because, our drive is so big to climb up the ladder or whatever it may be, right?
yeah. But then you can start to understand yourself and then connect with yourself. And that's where the self empathy comes in. I really think this is going to be a thing, and I'm
Yeah.
actually pouring as much research into it as I can. And I'm starting with what I'm doing now with my research, but that's where I see it going because I think this is where we may be missing a piece.
Yeah, and I think that that's the beautiful part about so much of the work that you've done is you're trying to find the missing puzzle pieces, which is so beautiful because if you think about mindset and connection and values, right? Like so many of the things that you've talked about, so often it feels like we're missing some of that information because I mean, most of us weren't gifted those tools. We didn't have the role models, or we didn't know how to utilize our role models in the correct way to help us understand all of these pieces of our puzzle that you've just mentioned. And so
Yeah.
you said something that I want to go back to. And we might get a little shade for this, but that's what we're here for is to break some of these stigmas. So
Right.
you mentioned with self-empathy, one of the things to look at is how I respond or what I do affects others. I
Sure.
know we've had conversations, and it might not be the easiest season to talk about this because many times it's, well, I'm going to show up and it's really about how you feel, and I'm going to let you own those emotions, not about how I affected you. So
Right.
I'm trying to think of a clear way to ask you this question, but I hope you're getting my gist in this. If I'm exploring how I impact other people and how I show up in that space, how do I actually get curious without maybe getting tripped up on some of those things that I just mentioned? If that was clear enough.
I'm trying to think. I think I understand what you're saying because empathy is about being in feeling with the other person, but
Right.
yet you're looking at what you're doing and your reaction and your awareness, right?
Right.
Within self empathy. And I think that's partially the difference between self empathy and empathy. Because self empathy, you're looking at understanding and connection for yourself. Empathy is where you're doing connection and understanding with others.
Mm.
But by understanding and connecting with yourself and knowing where your triggers are, knowing how this stuff works for you, understanding how you may be reacting as a human being, it's going to help you connect and understand another human being better because they may not have the exact same triggers and the exact same responses you have, but I bet there's as many similarities as there are differences.
Mm. Okay, so if I'm hearing you, if I, as a leader, are in a space that I don't maybe get along with somebody well, and I'm having a challenge with how they're presenting, if I get curious in the empathy space, how can that help me get along with those on my team or those that I work with or those in my family that I don't quite vibe with if I understand empathy in any of these categories? How is that going to be beneficial?
Well, first of all, there has to be an understanding that having empathy does not mean you don't have boundaries.
Yes, correct.
So, yes, I mean, there is still boundaries. If you're talking business, there's still business to be done. We're not probably in business for volunteer. We're there for profit, productivity, and innovation. We're there for a purpose. We want to get our word out. We have things to do. So it isn't all just, I want to understand you. I want to feel you. I want to feel this empathy. But rather, it's a very strategic use of empathy so that now I understand what you need as an employee, as a customer, as a board member, as a member of my management team. So now I can optimize what we're doing to create even more of what we want within this organization.
Yeah. And you even mentioned in your book, what I love is that your book is written on the empathic leader, but
Uh,
everything that you're saying for those that are listening, if you're not in a team, if you're not in an organization, you're like, how do I apply this stuff to my life? realize that like your team, she's also talking about your family unit, right?
Yes.
So even as a parent, one of the things that, you mentioned before that I often think about is how am I modeling to actually help understand, right? Like you mentioned how the baby has the contagion of those
Mhm.
emotions. If I'm showing up to that space in judgment as a parent or even as a leader, it's going to be felt. And so
Yes.
being able to model what the coming into a space looks like in a calmer way, in a more empathic way. Yes, parents and leaders have to have boundaries. And I love that you mentioned that because we can't have the woo-wee without the protection. We've got to be
Yes.
careful there.
Yeah.
And so everything that Dr. Melissa has mentioned, I hope for those of you listening and you're like, I don't know how to connect these, I hope that that was helpful. And that was often times as I got the pleasure of reading the book early, thinking about of the importance that she's not just only talking about the organization leaders, even though it's vitally important right now. We're also talking about those leaders in our homes and within our relationships. And so, even as you mentioned that, what would you say as we wrap up this beautiful topic of empathy is something that you wish more people from family and just relationships to organizations really knew and grasped when it came to understanding leading with empathy?
I think there's probably two things. Because the first is the understanding, because you mentioned it, that empathy and judgment cannot exist in the same space. Period. Can't do it. Whether it's just for you or it's between people, that's it. You can't.
Yeah.
So if you're feeling judgment, either for yourself or other people, you can't feel empathy. And that's a huge signal to take a step back and try it again. I actually did my TEDx talk on that, on self-empathy
Yeah.
and self-judgment. So
And
if
I
there,
will link that because it's so good.
so I mean, that's the first thing. But the second is to understand that even though we talk about empathy and communication and understanding between two people, charity starts at home. You have
Mm.
got to start with the self-reflection and the self-awareness and the self-empathy. You may even have a certain amount of empathy naturally, but without having the self-reflection and the self-empathy in place, it's just not going to work. You really need to have those first. And whether that means with your self-reflection, maybe you're journaling, you might be doing like little meditations, whether you have an accountability partner, people in leadership, this can't be someone that works for you. You need someone who's going to give you kind truth. Maybe it's hiring a coach, but make sure you have a coach that's coaching you on the right stuff.
Mm.
Whatever it is, you have got to have that input to understand through self-reflection, what self-awareness and self-empathy. Without starting at home and getting those things together, no matter how talented you are with empathy, it's always going to be just a little bit out of reach.
Yeah. I love those tips. And I think that those are so tangible as well because both of those, in and of themselves, just show you the importance of checking in with yourself and being accountable, but curious without judgment. And so
Yeah.
it's something that I say all the time to clients. And in the clinical field, I think it's even just as important if you want to make change in how you're healing or how you're communicating. I have adored spending time with you and just getting to know even more about your journey. You guys don't miss out at pre-orders here. Her book is amazing. You putting yourself out there and being vulnerable and then doing the research and diving into your purpose again to show up and tell your story and let us hear it, but also give us some freaking tools for us to be better humans in a world that it's tough. Conversations and growth are tough right now, and we know that, but you're not alone in it. I will make sure to put all of Dr. Melissa's information where you can purchase the book. If you are looking for coaching in the empathy field, how to get in contact with her. And Dr. Melissa, you're such a testament because you're such an educated powerhouse of a woman who is so strong through this, but you're so often in this conversation, you said, you know what? I got to get back to some research. I've got to understand this a little bit more. And because it is, knowledge is power, right? Not to
Yes,
sound
it
cliche.
absolutely is. Yeah. But it's true. I mean, it is. And the more we can understand ourselves, the more we can understand each other. So,
Yes. Thank you for being here
yeah,
today, and everyone have a great day.
perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you gained what you needed to hear today. Healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about the strength of moving forward. If today's episode resonated with you, take a moment to share it with someone you love, because when we share with love, we help to break the stigma together. If you want to connect with me and learn more about what we're doing over at Mental Summit to break these stigmas, please connect with me over at mymentalsummit.com. Keep showing up, keep growing, keep going together, and remember you're not alone in this.